Right. Good morning, whoever's out there. Vandana. Nice and quiet in the chat room this morning. Everyone's deep in meditation. I think hopefully everything's plugged in and working. If someone could just let me know that I am indeed live and that there's sound and that there's sight. Hello from North Dakota. Thanks, Alex. So the sense doors of eye and ear are working okay. Wonderful. Okay, so now some people are appearing or hitting the keyboard. Just while we're waiting for others perhaps to join through the notification, I just wanted to mention that this week I did a brief interview with an Italian woman called Erika Bassani, who's heading up a project called the Women Awakening Project. And she's exploring some of the themes around being female in the spiritual world and talking with various female spiritual teachers around the globe, and has already written a sort of a short book on that already, but is continuing this project. So I've put her video link up on my channel, so you can find it in this particular archive, the live stream archive, if you're interested to listen to the interview and some of the themes that we discussed. And you'll find in that video all the links to her project and ways that you might like to become involved or just keep abreast of it, and or support Erika to develop and deepen this project, a really worthwhile project and an interesting project at that. And just to give the women's voice a little bit more prominence in this world. As we know, it's a little quieter, a little more overlooked, perhaps a little shyer, a little bit more reluctant to come out to the foreground, especially in the current climate. So for all women and men out there who find this area kind of interesting and perhaps a little unbalanced when we're searching for spiritual teachings and spiritual teachers, there is there's a glut of male gurus out there and teachers, not so many females. And this is an interesting, and it doesn't, obviously it's not that women are less spiritually developed. Far from it. But why aren't we hearing their voices as much? And this issue has been ongoing for centuries, and now there's many more voices, particularly in the West, who want to bring it to the fore to discuss it. And obviously in India there are many spiritual teachers too, and female teachers too. Perhaps you have to look a little harder. Anyway, it's an interesting area. Ultimately, the Dharma, the truth, transcends the distinctions of male and female, and yet we live in a conditioned realm where all these distinctions, conditionings, prejudices, biases, so on, play out. So how to kind of balance that, to acknowledge that there are male and female forms. In ultimate reality, it's kind of meaningless, but at the relative level, there's a dance playing itself out. And how can we bring a more balanced, harmonious, respectful dance to that. So that's just to give you the heads up about that interview and her project, and for those of you who would like to explore it further, it's there. Okay. So shall we start the meditation for those of you who haven't been before? And I see some people who I know who haven't been before. Hello, Marion from Canberra. Nice to see you. If you haven't been before, we just start with a short guided meditation and then we open it up for some questions and answers. And what I'll do, which worked quite well last time, is in a minute when the meditation starts anyway, we'll turn the chat room off just because people sometimes come in halfway and it's a little distracting. And also, I just wanted to invite you to do a slightly different approach to the meditation this time. Okay, so we're all here. Just going to turn the chat off for now. Thank you, though, for stating your presence, because it's always good to know that there's people out there. So just get yourself comfortable wherever you are now, if that's possible, in a quiet, secluded place. Again, if that's possible. It's not always possible in this world, so we learn to just work with what conditions present themselves, but also to understand that meditation doesn't really have to have perfect conditions. Whatever conditions we have, we can utilize it to awaken, to be present. And so for this meditation, I wanted to invite you to try it, even just for a little while at the beginning, with a soft gaze, an open eye meditation. So I'm going to try something that might work. If you'd like to gaze, because if, like me, you've got your laptop in front of you, then rather than look at me sitting here, I'll give you a bell to gaze at in a minute, or depending on where you're sitting, you might have an opportunity just to gaze out into this open, clear sky, or a blank wall or something. So the idea is just to be able to soften your eyes just on one very neutral point. So here's the bell. I'm going to try this, see if it works. Sweet. I think it's working. So you can see my beautiful bell. And you know I'm still here in the background. And so you can gaze on this bell. Allowing your eyes to just be soft and relaxed. And even though you're gazing on an object, you're not becoming rigidly fixated. So you're not staring at it and causing your eyes to become sore. You're finding a way to let your eyes just be soft and open. And your awareness to be open as well. And learning how to practice with open eyes meditation is very helpful for being in the world, because you can do it anywhere, on the train, on the plane, in the doctor's waiting room, and so on, so forth. And no one needs to know that you're meditating. You're simply being present, being relaxed, and keeping your mind and heart open. So whatever thoughts come into the mind, don't see them as a problem. Just see them as passing phenomena. Floating clouds, drifting winds. And see how peaceful it is just to rest on one object without needing to think about the object or label the object, analyze the object. Whether that be the bell, the sky, or a blank wall. It's simply a space to rest the mind. If your eyes become sore or watery, just notice how you might be straining and find a way, experiment with it. Find a way that your eyes can be really relaxed, as if you're looking into the far distance. But not focusing in a really strong way. The mind starts to daydream and drift into thoughts of the past, desires for the future. It's just the mind doing what it does when it's left unchecked. So gently come back. Rest the eyes on the bell, on the sky. Fully present. Fully awake. And naturally, the mind starts to empty more and more the conceptual thinking. Not through force, not through tension, just a gentle waking up. There's this natural awareness, this empty knowing. It's just sitting there with the bell. You just have to keep remembering and recognizing it again and again. And the incentive to do that is that you realize how deeply peaceful and relaxing it is. We're not setting out to achieve present moment awareness, to conquer relaxation. It's just unveiling the naturalness of it all. Simply through recognizing. It's always there. It's a natural state of the mind. Even if thoughts are passing through, they come from this source and they dissolve back into this source. So we're not in conflict with anything. If your eyes start to get really tired, then you can just close them gently. Moving in and out of open gaze, closed eyes is fine to try. Or if you feel that you can really relax with open gaze, then continue with that for a little while longer. Whatever's arising is fine. See how it comes to natural cessation. We're not looking for some perfect state, some ideal state. If that's your motivation in meditation, it just causes tension. And we move further and further away from a peaceful abiding. The peaceful abiding is to be found with whatever arises. An aching knee, a broken heart, a crazy mind, you can peacefully abide in the midst of these changing moods, emotions, thoughts, and physical sensations. Just like the lotus flower that rises above the mud, pure, untouched, unsullied. So too is the natural state of mind. Your Buddha nature. It remains unmoved. But it's not a cold indifference, a disassociated, disconnected, empty void. It's a warm, open, compassionate heart of full awareness and acceptance, just as things present themselves. Without the good or the bad, the right or the wrong, the wanting or the not wanting, the liking or the disliking. It's pure equanimity combined with compassion. So take your position as the lotus flower in the heart. And don't stir up the mud. The muddy pond will naturally settle when you keep remembering the lotus quite like quality of the mind. So when we abide as the lotus, you can see that there's two aspects to this. There's the calm and peaceful nature of the mind. And there's the clear, pure seeing of the mind. So this is known as samatha vipassana, tranquility and insight. The mind is peaceful, still, unmoved. And yet there's also a clear seeing, vipassana. Seeing things arise and come to cessation. Knowing the truth of impermanence. Clearly seeing the lack of a fixed entity in all of this. The non-self reality of all phenomena. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is unchanging in what arises and ceases. So please have a stretch or a break or a drink or whatever you might need to do as we come out of the meditation. It's an opportunity to ask some questions on Dharma, on practice. Questions. So if you've got some questions, please write them into the chat. And then once I've got a series of questions, I'll turn the chat off for a bit, because what happens is that those of you who've been before will know the questions come in and then it just goes and I lose it, and then people are writing other comments and just having their own discussions, and it's a little hard to stay focused for me, and maybe for you as well, on just the questions. And I appreciate that people want to contribute and say stuff, but it's just a little hard to just stay focused on a Q&A. So we've got a couple of questions already, so I might just leave it open for a few minutes, because John and Michael's questions, I'll just go missing. 3 questions. Okay, 4 questions. Maybe I'll take 6 questions and then turn it off. So get in your question quick. Okay. I'll start with John's. Maybe one more, and then I'll turn off, because already I'm starting to lose John's as it's slipping away. Okay, don't worry, I might turn it back on if I get through the first 6 questions. Okay, we'll go back. Okay, John. I think he was the first one. Hang on, I'll just check that I haven't missed one already. Yeah, John. Do you think there is truth in statements like, you're always right where you need to be, or everything happens for a reason, or even God has a plan for you? So the question is, do I think, and do you think, people, there is truth in statements like that? Well, I think the only way we can ever speak about whether we think there is truth in statements is whether we have seen directly and experienced it directly. If they're just platitudes that you pick up in some spiritual book, and you've never experienced that as a truth, then it's just an intellectual, sounds good, but it just remains as an intellectual idea or ideal, doesn't it? But personally, for myself, there's a lot of truth that resonate for me with those statements that you've shared, because I've experienced it directly. Now, to talk about my own experience, it may or may not be helpful, because, again, it's putting words to things that often transcend words, things that become deeper truths that one knows in the heart or non-conceptually. But you might just say it's more an intuitive understanding that, and even that first statement is not even that intuitive. It's kind of obvious, even if you use logic for that first one. Of course, you're always right where you need to be. Where else could you be? People say this shouldn't be happening now, but it is happening. So even logic applied to that, not just one's experience, one's intuitive understanding. If it wasn't meant to happen, it wouldn't have happened. And so we're always like, well, that shouldn't have happened. This should have happened. It's like, but that happened. So we deal with that. We accept that. So there's also, that first statement, for example, is about knowing that it's about trust, isn't it? That we receive the lessons, the people who come into our lives, the situations, because, we could say karmically, that's karma. The irrevocable truth of karma means that things happen as they happen. And they can't happen any other way, because there's a karmic thread that most of us aren't aware of. We don't have the mind of a Buddha to really understand the intricacies of karma. And he recommended not even trying to figure it out, because it would drive us mad. But he could see that this was happening for this person because of karmic causes and conditions. He had the mind of a Buddha to see that. Some people have those sorts of powers, city powers. Most of us don't. So then I guess we're being asked to trust, and then so sometimes we go, this has happened for me. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense. But at a deeper level, it feels like, yeah, it makes sense. I feel something, there's a reason that's happening or that happened. So I guess it's a leap of faith with that first one, of trust, of letting go, of being prepared not to really know exactly why things unfold the way they do. I mean, the world itself. That's why most people ask if God is loving, or if there's, why do these horrible things happen to innocent people? And that's a really hard one to deal with, because we don't have the eye of a Buddha, and we have very black and white views of the world. But it's so complex, incredibly complex, and unknown to us. So maybe I'll just leave that kind of there. And everything happens for a reason is the second statement, which is kind of, very much related to the first one. And God has a plan for you. Well, it depends on, how you relate to God. If you think it's some judgmental, patriarchal guy in the sky, you have this notion of a God punishing you, or a God having your best interests in mind. Everyone has such different notions of God or no God. Or you might want to translate that as the universe has a plan for you. It can be helpful sometimes for some people just to hand it over to a higher power, and without projecting or anthropomorphizing a God. It might just be that there's some higher power happening within me that I don't understand, but I'm going to surrender to that. And, try it out for yourself. Take up some of these statements, and if they have a ring of truth, even logically for you, then you have to explore it in your own life and experiences, because it doesn't really matter what I say. It's not your life, and it's not your experience. And see if it has some truth. It may not. So then you deal with your own truth, your own reality. And of course, that will keep shifting and changing as you deepen your practice, as you have wider perspectives about things, greater insights. So it's always unfolding. Best not to fixate on these statements as absolute truths either, because then we go around bashing people's heads with them, saying, it's all God's plan, or it's the divine working, and it's all going, we're in the age of Aquarius and we're all awakening. It's like, there's so many spiritual platitudes and statements out there. And, it's best to be quiet, I think. Just look within. Okay, Michael, what are your thoughts on investigating the shadow and connecting with your inner demon or higher genius? So shadow work, this is what meditation is really all about. And those of you who've been meditating for a while will understand that and have discovered that for themselves, especially those of you who have been on retreats, silent retreats, spent time in solitude and seclusion, or just started a meditation practice. And the first thing you notice is, God, there's so much crap. It's, all this nonsense in the mind. You think, where's that coming from? You go on a retreat and you're thinking about stuff that happened when you were, I don't know, 10 years old. Wow, I haven't thought about that for ages. And then these really uncomfortable feelings of jealousy and anger and resentment and lust or egoic pride. It all comes up. This is meditation practice. This is, it's often talked about as purification, the path of purification. We don't know, again, we don't know so much. We don't know how much positive and negative karma we're dealing with. We're brought in from lifetime to lifetime. And even if you don't believe in lifetime to lifetime, just this lifetime will do. How much stuff we've accumulated through conditioning and then our conditioned responses to it, how much stuff we've pushed down due to trauma, due to fear, due to all sorts of reasons and different experiences. And so when you meditate, you're not adding on, you're sitting there, hopefully, letting go of stuff, and you're giving space for things to clear out. So that's why it's called a purification practice. And it can feel really awful. Of course, it feels awful when, some deep resentment comes up, some deep trauma. And that opens up a whole nother discussion about particularly long, powerful meditation retreats when people aren't ready to face that shadow aspect. And it can send them off. And people do have psychotic episodes or just come face to face with the shadow or the trauma too quickly without having a stable base in meditation. So this question about how to investigate it, I think we all have to know, at least in this life, we can't know what we're bringing in from other lives. But if you've experienced a lot of childhood trauma, just to go very gently. Don't go signing up for a 10-day Goenka retreat. It might just send you right off if there's masses of trauma. You need to go gently, because I've seen it too often. And even saying that, we just don't know either. Anything can come up. But there is a need to eventually come to face the demon, as you say, and to develop wisdom around how to work with it. So this is the practice. And eventually when we turn to face the demons aren't so scary anymore. If we've got wisdom, we just see them as empty phenomena, just past stuff arising and ceasing. But until we have a really solid, strong, firm foundation in wisdom, the wisdom mind, it's very hard to face a full-on frightening demon without being terrified or blown away. And you say the higher genius, well, as long as the higher genius isn't picked up as some conceited sense of yourself, I like to just say the natural state of mind. The natural state of mind within all of us, the Buddha nature, is that which knows, but it's not some personal claim. Because if we relate to that in an egoic way, it's just the same as running away from a demon. It's just picking up another conceited sense of oneself. So I'd be laughing at the inner demon and laughing at this concept of a higher genius too, if it's a sense of self. Okay. So hopefully that's addressed that question. Greetings from Tuscany. Lovely Tuscany. Imagine Tuscany is very beautiful. My question is about the dreamless sleep as our natural state. Could we affirm that the dreamless state is synonymous with samadhi? Thank you. Well, it depends. If there's awareness and wakefulness in the dreamless state, you could equate it with a certain type of samadhi. So, a lot of masters or yogis never really lose awareness, even when the mind enters into the dreamless state. The knowing nature of the mind is there. For most of us, when we fall into the dreamless state, it's not a state of samadhi. It's there's no awareness, but it's what we kind of intuitively know as a very peaceful state. So that's why we like to fall asleep at night, because we disappear eventually. I mean, we're running around in our dreams trying to figure things out, processing the day, processing things that haven't managed to resolve themselves. And then when those dreams stop and the mind enters into the deeper state of the dreamless state, what is it, the theta waves, then this concept of me disappears. But most of us just fall deep into the dreamless state. And the body, that's when the body is rejuvenating. A lot of healing takes place at all levels. But you can't say it's a state of samadhi for most people because there's no awareness. But it is pointing to that state that is our natural state. Well, not even our natural state, is the fabric of the universe, if you like. Vandana has asked, how does one deal with knee pain even when you are experiencing bliss and pleasure in the mind? Well, if you're experiencing bliss and pleasure in the mind, you don't need to deal with knee pain, because you might have a sort of a vague awareness that there's a little pain in the knee, but just focus on the bliss and the pleasure in the mind, not in a clingy, craving way, but just rest into that, and eventually the knee pain will probably just disappear. Now, having said that, there are stupid meditators who might have a medical condition and then decide that they're just going to push through it and ignore their body and end up doing severe damage to their knees, particularly in meditation. So you have to know your own body. And if you've got a medical chronic knee problem, then it's a bit silly, isn't it, to push through that pain. So is it just natural pain in the body, or is it a knee that's been severely damaged and needs attention, i.e. not sitting cross-legged for long periods of time? But you find in meditation, if it's just kind of a general aching of the body, because that's what the body does, it's an aching thing to be embodied in, isn't it? Bodies ache. You can't sit for long periods of time without sore back, itchy knee, itchy head, sore knee. But if it's just that sort of pain and you focus more on the stillness of the mind, the pleasure in the mind, then what happens is it actually dissolves those sort of pains. They just disappear. And again, this is something for you and for everyone to experience, so that you're, rather than just moving with every single little ache in the body, which sometimes beginners do. Oh, that's uncomfortable, I'm going to move. So there's never any physical stillness. And you just learn to just, okay, that's a little bit uncomfortable. I'm just going to come back to settling the mind, just being with the natural state. And the more and more you practice that, eventually you finish the meditation and all the pain's disappeared. That's what happens. So it's showing you how the mind, a lot of this stuff is just made more of by reactivity. And the mind, the natural state of the mind can just dissolve, or those things just dissolve when we come back to just resting in the non-conceptual state, which you can term bliss and pleasure, if you like. Just checking the lights changing, of course. So last question was, thank you. I'm simply curious about chakras. How do you make sense of them? Well, I don't really, because I don't think about chakras that much. I'm not, doing a yogic practice with chakras. So I'm certainly not the person to ask about chakras. I am aware of chakras as a concept, and to some extent as an experience in terms of energy centers, but I don't focus on them. That's just because that's the practice. If you want to learn more about chakra practice, then that is a yogic practice. So you can pick that up and align yourself with the teacher who knows more about them. Okay, I've reopened the chat so that if there's any further questions, we can maybe take another 4 or 5, depending on how long I talk. I'll give you a chance to write them in. I'll adjust the light. But it works better, hey, just turning it off and on. Well, it works better for me because I stay focused with the questions and I don't lose you. So there's 2 questions. Maybe if there's 2 more, then I'll turn it off again and stay focused. Can you see the trees outside? It's a sun's coming out. Okay. I got 4 questions. So hopefully no one's in the middle of writing. I'm just turning the live chat off again. Oh, I got one more. Good on you, Amanda. I just got you in time. Well done. So Reverend Dillis is asking, working for justice, sometimes it seems the mud gets stirred somewhat, at least, as much as I'm trying not to stir it. Sometimes when we try not to stir it is the very reason it gets stirred up. So don't try to stir it. Don't try not to stir it. Just notice things are stirred up. It's not a problem. I'm using an example of working for justice, and I see, for example, I'm not saying this is what you see, but I see a sense of great pride in what I'm doing. I'm such a good person. I'm working for justice. That's, okay. That's just a sense of pride, conceit coming up, to see it for what it is. Or I see a sense of, oh, these people they're so hateful. They're so, we've got to get them. We've got a sense of revenge comes up. Just see that. It's a reaction of revenge. But if you have this ideal that you have to work for justice and be peaceful and loving all the time and not feel resentment and not feel conceit, not feel despair and despondent at the state of the world, then you're going to fail, because of course those things will come up. If we live in our heads about an ideal peace warrior, for example, it's just an ideal, and we're not ideals. We're humans that still have to work with this shadow stuff that we just spoke about. So, and that happens. That's the interesting thing, I think, is those of you who've studied this with organizations and group processes. Remember one thing I read many years ago. In Australia, we had a commission or an organization for workplace bullying in the workplace. So their job was to oversee and make policy recommendations and facilitate practices in the workplace to deal with bullying. This particular organisation was rife with bullies. Classic, huh? So they were dealing with all these grievances within their own organisation about the number of bullies. That's the shadow stuff and the ideal. We're the anti-bullying organisation and everybody else is not, and we're not going to look at it. We don't look at it because we're the ideal, right? So it's often, that's exactly what happens. And it's same with these, say people who work for peace. They're not peaceful. They're really angry. They have the ideal that what they want the world to be peaceful, but they actually go about being very aggressive and violent about it. You just have to look at that in so many aspects. Spirituality is a classic one. We're so spiritual and loving, and there's this massive shadow, okay, you see it in the gurus, the male gurus who are putting themselves forward as these perfect beings, and they're lusty and they're taking drugs and they're exploiting people, and it's like, so much for spirituality. So when we're not authentic and when we're living from an ideal, this is what comes up. So try not to stir it up. Try not to stir it up. Just be honest, look at it, and don't try to live from some idea ill about yourself as a justice warrior. Please describe knowing. Ironically, knowing is confusing. Is there a difference between awareness and knowing? Ironically, knowing is confusing. Yeah, this is when we sort of start creating more dualistic notions around something that's non-dual. So knowing and awareness, in my understanding, is pretty synonymous. It's just different words. Some, in my tradition, they talk about knowing a lot, but they also talk about awareness a lot. So Ajahn Chah, for example, and Upasika Ki would just say to be the knowing, the one, or Buddho, which was also a mantra, sort of a mantric thing, is just the knowing, the one who knows. And then Ajahn Sumedho will talk about awareness itself, being just to trust in awareness. So initially when we start out on the practice, of course it's kind of a dualistic, we're getting to know both these concepts and these experiences, but there's still a sense of a me. It's a me here knowing, or there's a me here being aware. So we have this split between the meditator and the meditation. But that's the way we start. We're not going to just jump into the non-dual state. because it comes back again to the purification. What we're purifying is this sense of delusion around a me, and the me who clings, the me who keeps creating a sense of themselves. But every now and then we just rest into that awareness, and me, the sense of me, disappears. And that's when it becomes a kind of a pure knowing or a pure awareness. But if there's someone there trying to be aware or be the knowing, it's just a bit like I just said to the previous question. We're stirring things up by trying to be the knowing, or by trying to be perfect, or trying to be a pure awareness. I think it was Krishnamurti who said that as soon as I'm aware, then there's no awareness. You can understand that even logically. It's like self-consciousness. I'm aware of myself as pure awareness. Who's aware? It's obviously the conceptual mind, the egoic mind that's getting off on themselves, being aware. But when you're really aware, it's just awareness, and there's no pride in that. There's no ownership in that. There's no sense of attainment in that. It's just awareness. Come back to being a child and looking at children. They're just aware. They're pure little children. They're just pure awareness. And then they get grumpy and they start to develop their egoic reactions to things. But at their best, at their natural, they're just aware. They're not aware that they're aware, because they are just awareness, fully embodied, fully engaged with what they're doing, full of joy and openness. It's just awareness in action. So I hope that answers your question, which didn't confuse you anymore, I hope. So Sally is asking, is the deep, dreamless sleep what the Buddha refers to as emptiness or no self? Well, the Buddha never specifically spoke like that. I think you're aware that you're just trying perhaps to make the connections, which is fine. The no self nature, if I talk about that in terms of the Buddha would, he pointed to that no self nature in everything, not just in the deep dreamless sleep, but certainly in that state of, we'll go back to the pure knowing or the pure emptiness. Clearly the appearance of the egoic conceptual mind disappears. So there's none of that self, but there's no other self either. You can't start to posit a higher self. I mean, you can, but it's just a positing. It's just another concept. But even when we're acting full out of an ego sense of self, it's still no self because we think it's a self. That's myself. Well, that's my ego acting, but it's not really. It's just an appearance. So that's why we can be free straight away, because when we really recognize, this stuff, it's not me and mine. It's not really a self. It's just a bundle of conditioning. The stuff you hate, the stuff you love and want to claim as you, none of it's you. It's just shades of appearances. It's different karmic, good, what we would call good and bad karma. Even going beyond that, it's just not even that. It's just stuff arising and ceasing, and it has no self in it. Ultimately, it has no fixed entity self in it. But with confusion and delusion, we claim it as me and mine. This is who I am. I'm a good person. I'm a bad person. I'm a depressed person. I'm, a really successful person. Whatever sense of self we create, it's all illusion. And it's important not to then, I think you're saying too, when we get to a dreamless or the empty state of knowing, it's not another self. Don't sully that by attaching to that as a new self. All phenomena is empty of a fixed, permanent, unchanging self. If you manage to find one, then please report it to the masters. But in all their centuries, decades of practice, no one's been able to find a fixed, permanent, unchanging self. And when they find that that is just what causes us suffering because we attach to it as a personality, as a me, as a mine, and that all just dissolves, then what's left is not another self, it's not a higher self. You know, it's okay if you want to use those words initially, but it's very important to let go of creating another concept out of something that's non-conceptual, beyond words, beyond the phenomenal world. Because that's what, you know, freedom is, what nirvana is. It's the going out of this fire of delusion and confusion and ignorance. And when we say emptiness, if you want to use that term, it's not a nothingness, it's not a blank void. Emptiness is empty of delusion, confusion. It's the natural state. And, you know, it's what we really are. And hopefully people experience just micro glimpses of that to give you confidence to know, it's there already. The empty, knowing, peaceful state, empty of greed, hatred, and delusion, of confusion, of sense of a self. Having said that, it doesn't mean that we don't kind of dance with phenomena and be half sensible and know that, yeah, we've got this personality and proclivities. That's part what it means to be human. But we don't attach to it or believe it or get sucked in by it, and therefore we don't suffer. And we don't make others suffer. Okay, so question below. Any recommendations for a beginning practice for someone already awakened? Well, if you're really already awakened, you're not really having a beginning practice, are you? So maybe just drop this notion that you're already awakened and not drop any notions of yourself and begin by being humble, letting go of all these views and opinions you already have developed, if indeed you have. Bit of a confusing question. Just sit down and watch your mind. That's the best beginning practice. And really watch your mind and be honest with what comes up. It may not look so awakened. Okay, Amanda, last question of the session. By letting a reoccurring unpleasant feeling or disturbing thought be, not engaging with it, will they eventually stop appearing? That's the idea, but no one's going to give you any guarantees. Well, I'm not, because if you look at that question, there's still a wanting. If I do this, will it stop eventually? If there's still someone there that's wanting this unpleasant or disturbing thought to stop, you're kind of subtly still perpetuating it and still engaging with it. What about taking the attitude, if it stops, it stops. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm not invested. It's just a thought. It's just a unpleasant feeling. Even if it's there, it doesn't need to disturb you. You're calling it a disturbing thought. You're calling it an unpleasant feeling. But go look at that label. It's just a fear. It can be just a feeling, or it can be just a thought. The unpleasant and the disturbing is what we add on to it as a judgment, as a perception, and what's called a sanya. We've learned to go, this is an unpleasant feeling, and this is a disturbing thought. But as you go deeper, let's talk about an unpleasant feeling. What we've learned to share as an unpleasant feeling. I'm not sure if it's just a sensation or a feeling of, say it's a feeling of anger, resentment. Okay, it's unpleasant because we don't want it and we don't like it. And we've learned, society said that if you're an angry and resentful, particularly a woman, that's bad. All right, so you start unpacking all these labels. So, oh yeah, I'm not gonna believe it anymore as right or wrong, good or bad. It's just a feeling of anger or resentment. What does it feel like? It feels tight in the guts. It feels tight in the jaw. The thoughts come up. They're a bit, anarchy thoughts. It just feels like a mess, right? That's the first layer, and we don't like it. But can we just go, oh, okay, this is unpleasant. We'll accept it at one level. But as we go deeper, it's just sensations and feelings arising and ceasing. And if we stop the judgment about it as being good or bad, particularly right or wrong, then it loses a lot of that unpleasantness and disturbing. And then that drops away, and it's just a thought, a blip, doesn't disturb us anymore because we're not invested in it as me and mine. We're not identified as, oh, this is who I am. This is right, this is wrong. It's not unpleasant anymore because we're not pushing it away. We're not trying to get away from it. So if you're not trying to get away from a feeling, is it unpleasant? No. You sit with it. Bit heavy, bit tight. But that's all it is. And then if you're really in that state, then it will, of course, dissolve and stop appearing eventually. But, who knows where? We've got to keep working. It might come back again. But if your attitude is like, so what? Comes back, there's that feeling of resentment, of anger, guilt. Oh, yeah, I know that. What the Buddha would recommend when those things appear is simply, I know you. Even when the Buddha was said to be fully awakened, Mara came back, the personification of, in the Buddhist texts, of evil, of darkness. Mara sometimes came back even to the fully awakened one. And all he would do was, oh yeah, I know you, Mara. Mara would just dissolve. This is the kind of legend, if you like. But the deep truth in that teaching is that's the practice. I know you greed. I know you anger. I know you resentment. I know you pride. I'm not buying into you anymore. I'm not identified with you anymore as who and what I am. It's just a conditioned reaction, response, and appearance. So it doesn't have the sting anymore. But, the Buddha didn't say, oh gosh, I hope Mara doesn't come back again. I thought I was fully awakened. What's he doing back again? Mara came back a couple of times, apparently, according in the suttas. He said the same thing, I know you, Mara. Oh, he knows me. And it dissolves. So I think that answers your question, hopefully, Amanda. Don't worry about it. Keep developing your wisdom and insight to understand the nature of feelings and thoughts to be empty, to be not you and yours, and therefore these notions of pleasant or unpleasant, disturbing, They can just be feeling. So what the Buddha said was, in the sensed, let there just be the sensed. In the seen, let there be only the seen. In the heard, let there be only the heard. Right? So that applies in the cognized, let there be only the cognized. You just know it. You don't add on. So that's one of the most profound teachings that the Buddha gave to Bahia. It's on my channel in the Theravadan playlist. You might like to listen to it. It's called the Bahia Sutta. And when Bahia turned his mind to that most profound teaching, Bahia attained arahantship. And so that's how powerful it can be when we just let what we see just be seen, no add-ons. What we hear is just what we hear, no judgments, no add-ons. Feeling, sensing, thinking. Beep, beep, it's a thought, it's gone. Don't add on, don't engage. All right, folks. Well, we have come to the end of the session. And thank you for your questions. And I hope some of the responses were helpful. Jatindra, probably do the next session in about 3 weeks' time. At the moment, we're very ensconced in a Sangha project, so we're kind of spreading out the sessions here at the moment. But I think that's okay because there's a lot of resources, isn't there? And just to repeat what I said at the beginning, for those of you who joined late, there's an interview I did this week with an Italian woman called Erika Pisani, who's heading up a Women Awakening project. So if you'd like to listen to the interview or get involved with her project and hear some of the other women she's interviewed, she's got her own channel. The links are there, and you'll find the video in this playlist, live stream playlist, and the Women of Wisdom playlist. So sending all blessings, good wishes, and metta to you all. Until we meet again, stay well. Keep practicing. Don't worry about anything. Okay, take care, everybody. Bye.